Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is a midnight podcast tonight, and I want to thank you all that are coming on to watch us. Again, I wanted to thank all our supporters out there, those that have subscribed, leaving your comments. We love it. We love the conversation. So just keep it up, keep it going. And that being said, before we start this wonderful podcast, I wanted to bring up two news issues, but two alerts. One from me first, and then one from Wanchaloa. We are going to finally, as request, have a live next month. This live, we haven't discussed everything in detail, but I think we want to just talk about, those that are decolonizing, those that are indigenizing, realizing their indigenous roots, and maybe what critique or who's criticize them, maybe oppose them and oppose this talk, because I'm sure a lot of people that watch this channel maybe discuss this with their friends, and maybe they've had people disagree with them. So I'd really like to talk about that. Again, this live won't happen until sometime next month, and then I'll leave that for Wanchaloa to explain with our next piece of news.
Hey guys, so for these next 2 weeks here soon, like June 11th ish to like the end of June to like this 27th or so, we're going to be a little bit on a hiatus. We're going to drop a video or two that we have, but we're going to be a little more absent. So don't get alarmed. We haven't abandoned the channel. It's just that we got stuff we got to take care of. I'm going to be stuck in the forest for 2 weeks. It's going to suck. So just throwing that out there. And Marcus was encouraging y'all to comment on please do. But also, if you really love us and there's haters, go ahead and gank them. Okay. Cause that'll help. Thanks.
yeah. We'll do that. Like I said, we love the comments. We love when people subscribe, check us out, like our videos. So to all of y'all that have done that, thank you so much. We appreciate it. That being said, without further ado, we're going to begin. Again, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very interesting and special guest tonight, and I've been looking forward to having you on.
Highly requested by you fuckers. Highly requested.
Highly requested. Ladies and gentlemen, Crispin, if you'd like to maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, please.
Yeah, so Yonkyats Crispin, Kanienkehaka, Niwaka Honsoldo, Federal Way, Nitewagenu. Now, what I just said was, my name is Crispin. I am Mohawk, and I'm from Federal Way up in Federal Way, Washington. I live in Seattle now, but I don't consider myself a Seattleite. I'm not. I've kind of gone in on rants about this place with you guys, and we've talked a little bit about where we've grown up. I've lived in different spots around this state, but it's interesting.
Yeah, I got to ask that because we did talk on live and we discussed some things about that, but just growing up in the northwest part of the states, I don't have very little friends that live there. So, and what I see on the news, I see the issues going on in Portland and how east, or more so the cities of Washington, and then the west part of the state are just two completely different areas. I guess you could say most of Washington, maybe the same with Oregon as well. I think I mix those up. Issues going on in Portland, but maybe there's issues going on in Seattle too, with protests and some other things going down. So I got to ask, like, how it is growing up there, as a native, indigenous person such as yourself. If there are like a lot of natives more so in the city, or do you see more in the countryside?
I feel like you see more in the countryside. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of natives out here, but there's a place downtown Seattle called Native Park. That's just what people have called it. There's a lot of, both talented, woodcarver types down there and people showcasing their art, but it's kind of like also a little bit of a homeless community, to where there's just a part of it's kind of near Pike Place, which is in downtown Seattle, and it's a major tourist attraction area. But Native Park is a little bit out of the ways from that, and there's like a homeless Native community that kind of looks after each other down there. I haven't been there in a while. Overall, I personally feel like it sucked out here, because it's still there's not that many natives compared to states like California, New York, New Mexico, Arizona, definitely Oklahoma too, Texas, you know. I haven't even met that many people, really only one outside of my own family. And, you know, I'm not really connected with that side of my family anymore. A lot of people in my family have died, or I'm just not in contact with my cousin. But, um, you know, I did run into a brother that was full blooded, I think, out here. You know, people, I'm 6'2.5", you know, this guy towered over me. He made me look short. He was 6'7" easily. He looked full blooded. He was from Kanienkehaka. So like he was from the heart of our territory in upstate New York. And Kanienkehaka is land that was actually pretty much taken back by the people. So I've tried to, you know, do what I can some years back when it comes to activism around here, but it's kind of a sleepy city, you know, when it comes to that kind of thing. And I don't know, it's hard to explain it, but it's like even with activism, let's say you guys were familiar with the Occupy movement, right? When it was happening on
Yes, somewhat.
Wall Street.
A little.
Yeah, so there was Occupy movements all over the country, and they had one here back in 2011, I want to say. I was part of that. Um, you know, I wasn't always proud of my indigenous roots. I would even say I was ashamed of it for a long time too, to an extent. You know, because it's kind of sad seeing some of the stuff that I've seen out here. You know, like you see a lot of people, a lot of indigenous women as like prostitutes. Like there's a lot of the MMIW thing going on here. And I'd read a statistic once that something like 92% of indigenous women, or at least that they surveyed, had been sexually assaulted at some point in their lifetime. So there definitely is tribal cultures out here that are around. The biggest tribe is going to be the Yakima, and that's a bit east of Seattle. They got about 14,000 straight up Yakimas, but I think their reservation has about 30,000 people because they've got a bunch of other related tribes living on their reservation. So it adds up. And a lot of them actually, you know, like they marry Mexicans too. So there's a lot of Mexican and Yakima babies pretty much.
Interesting.
It's really interesting. Would you say? I mean, would you say the Yakimas they consider like a lot of Mexicans to be also natives, or what? Have you talked to them about that?
I feel like it depends on which person, but I feel like the ones that are married to them, a lot of them do. And I think it was explained to me a long time ago, but Yakima County is pretty rural, but it's got, I would think, the highest southern native population in all of Washington. So
Yeah.
like most people consider it a barrio, like if they're out here, like they look at it as like that's the Mexican area. But a lot of Yakimas and Mexicans, they've worked alongside each other dating back to the 1930s. And I think a lot of the marriages came as a result of that because a lot of Yakimas were working, you know, in the farms too.
No. I was going to ask also, Crispin, was you said that the assaults on Native women. Now,
I said what?
did you say that the assaults and like the attacks on indigenous women and whatnot? Sorry, I
Yeah.
should pick that up with the mic right here. My question is, do you know, like, as far as like the statistics, are these attacks from other indigenous males, or are they from like non-indigenous, like non-native males?
There's always going to be some cases where it is indigenous males, and you know, talking to people from Alaska and like getting a gauge of the way it is in Alaska, like there's always going to be, because we're only going off how many sexual assaults were actually reported. So of course, like with Alaska natives, and I'm not like throwing any shade at Alaskan natives at all. This is a terrible thing that's happening to them. A lot of them, you know, like it'll be something like from their own family members. So in that case, it is American Indian men doing that. And in some cases, there's probably American Indian women doing it too, you know, like nobody's really innocent in this shit. But as far as nationally, statistically, and I would say even locally, it's mostly non-indigenous men doing this. And when I first started taking notice about like the sexual assault rate of Native women, the studies I'd read, I think I want to say in 2016 or so, they were saying it was 7 out of 10 that were non-Indigenous attackers. And part of that had to do with, for a long time, the way tribal sovereignty works and the way tribal law goes with versus federal and state and all that kind of shit. You basically have, it was to where if a non-native man, let's say, was living on the reservation and he beat up or sexually assaulted a native woman, they couldn't prosecute him because he wasn't a citizen of that tribe. So it would be up to either the state police or the FBI, whoever's jurisdiction it landed in. It's a really weird thing. I think the res natives, like those that were born in the res and not like urban like me, could explain it better. But yeah, for a long time these went unchecked. And what I noticed as you get from 2016 to now, you have more people. Then I started seeing, oh, it's 8 and 10. Suddenly it was rising. And I was like thinking, what's going on that the native rate is decreasing and the non-native rate is going up? And now it's currently 96% non-Indigenous men. And again, this is still only of those who reported it. So there's obviously going to be an underlying percentage that we don't know about, be they native or non-native. But it is overall mostly non-native men, and a lot of times it is inter-partner violence that this is happening. So yeah, and a lot of it is, you know, kidnapping people, kidnapping children, forcing them into prostitution. You know, it's very heartbreaking. It's frustrating.
It is frustrating, definitely.
Overall, I would say, yeah, it is mostly colonial people doing that. I'm not saying that native men are innocent or anything by any means, but I think even if we knew all the full numbers, it would still be non-natives doing it more, just because, I don't know, I feel like we try to hold our own accountable when that's done. I mean, there was this celebrity, he was an actor from the 90s, who's a Lakota guy who was accused of abusing women, and he was at least banished from his own reservation. So I feel like, I don't know. Sorry if that's an incomplete answer, but I feel like it's still going to be overall settlers, because Indigenous life is just not valued. You know?
Yeah, no, you're good.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. It makes sense. And plus, I mean, if, you know, there's always patterns, right? So I would say if the statistics are showing that it's way more non-Indigenous, then it probably would hold true. Probably, right? But we don't know.
And that might depend on what state you live in too, what's more prominent. Like up in Alaska, a lot of those villages up there, not necessarily the city, but they have a lot of villages where it is just mainly native people. So it's like, if you're going to get victimized by somebody, it's who you're around the most. But you look at these states in the Midwest, like South Dakota and all these, basically these oil camp states, it's going to be mostly white men doing it.
Yeah.
Kind of reminds me, like back in the older, previous centuries, like there's like a lot of issues with minors too in native tribes as well. I think I heard that when they entered the northern, or was it near Vancouver and whatnot, there's a lot of American miners that came, Washington, Vancouver area, and there's a lot of issues with Indigenous people as well, that were there. And this was in like the 1700s. So like I said, a couple centuries ago. Yeah, but it's said, I always am mad. Nah, I guess I am mad, that the media, the mainstream outlets don't cover these issues as much as they should be covered. So this is why, one of the reasons why Wanchaloa, have this podcast is to like shed more light on the problems going on. I think the media outlets, like the mainstream ones, have their own focus, and it isn't this, or it isn't. They have other issues that they believe are more important.
I mean, plus, like, not to get conspiracy theorists. I don't know why this is the case, but I've heard from Clear Bear and Koali that when they've posted about this issue specifically on Instagram, their stuff gets removed. And I wonder why that is. Because I know Instagram's not removing Black Lives Matter stuff from their shit. So just throwing that out there.
Yeah, it is definitely strange. It's almost scary, you know, that they removed the missing Indigenous women pictures. And like what you said, Clear Bear had brought that up, and I saw the post too that they got removed. But I guess my question is like, why? Like we're just trying to shed more light and bring more awareness on the subjects at hand, these problems, and yet they the admins and those in Instagram and other social media companies want to hide it. Same thing with Colombia as well. Hope this video stays.
Maybe
No, it
they're in
should.
them.
I mean, you never know. See, here's the thing. Like, I mean, a lot of these countries, like south of the border, like Mexico, is known for being very corrupt. And I think some people, like, when they're skeptical, they're like, "Oh, well, there's definitely the U.S. can't be corrupt," and I disagree. It can definitely be corrupt. You can't like when you have powerful people, it's hard to hold them accountable, no matter who the fuck they are or where the fuck they are.
Yeah. Sorry, Crispin, you're going to say something.
Oh, I don't even remember, but I will say that this country's got maybe a lot of countries have the problem with this, but this country doesn't really like to hold rich people accountable either. And I'm not some communist or anything, but I am going to admit that they are the ones that are, they got their boots on our necks, and they think that we're rolling in money.
Mhm.
If you're a northern native, they think that you're making, your highway robbery from casinos. If you're a southern native, they say you're not supposed to be in this country to begin with.
Yeah, I've heard of that. I think one of well, I'm not going to speak on your behalf, Marcus, but we've heard from people where they're like, "Oh, Northern natives like get a lot of money and they're rich because they get all the casino stuff," which is a complete myth.
Yeah,
So we've heard that from haters.
definitely heard that from people. I don't know what your thoughts on that were, Crispin. Were you going to answer?
Yeah, if that was the case, we wouldn't be the poorest demographic in the country, and people don't seem to understand is that not every tribe has casinos, and even the ones that have casinos, not all of them make a profit off of it. Like they did a video on this. It wasn't BuzzFeed, thank God.
BuzzFeed.
Video.
Sorry.
It's like a debate channel. I'm gonna have to find it, but they had a bunch of Southwestern natives talking about it, and yeah, they were talking about basically how some tribes, because of having a casino or even being like they were able to afford healthcare or something finally. I think it was the Navajo who were talking about that, and then you know if, if you're a people in poverty, why wouldn't you use what you can to make your way of life better? Now, there is people that will say, of course, that those that have gotten rich off the casinos are not sharing the wealth and they're not spreading the wealth around, and that can be a problem in of itself. You got crooked leaders that might, you know, not be looking out for the best interests of the people, but at the same time, nobody's ever saying to white people that they shouldn't be able to go and start a casino in Vegas. Not only that, casinos that were tied to the mafia. And it's actually funny because, sorry if this is getting too prematurely into the whole political thing, but it kind of ties into my point.
You're good.
Like with Donald Trump, before he said what he said about Mexicans, he was talking about the Akwesasne band of Mohawks in upstate New York. He was saying that basically that casino is tied to Italian mob activity, and it's just the dumbest thing ever because his casino actually was tied to it. One of his casinos in New Jersey. And the FBI actually came out and said, no, there's no connection between the Akwesasne and Mohawk casino and organized crime. So if even the FBI is like, you're lying, then you're full of shit. So, I mean,
Wow.
it's kind of like the East-West equivalent of each other with the casinos in Vegas and then, that situation. But it's like both cases, you got white people tied to mob activity and they're sitting there talking badly about native gaming.
Yeah.
That brings up a good point, and I wanted to like rehash one little point real quick. Was that like how I think at least in the education system, most of the generations, or at least as far as I know, are not taught about like how, the rich people and those in the government, the American government, did play a large role in the civil wars going on in Guatemala and Central America, Honduras, and they sided with the dictators. And I brought this up in another video that far right dictators never mesh well with indigenous populations. Of course, I feel that most of the country doesn't know that in the United States that our government did support these dictators that not only are held accountable for what they've done, but they also said many negative things about indigenous people before they became presidents of Guatemala and other countries as well. Saying negative things about Mayan people. So obviously, look at it from a logistical perspective. When you have someone who says all these racist things about indigenous people, and then you put them in a seat of power, that's not going to end well ever. And it's the same like we had some, our friend, forgot his name already, from Brazil, of Brazilian descent. And I was talking about Bolsonaro, and he had said a lot of negative things about the indigenous people in the Amazons. And now look what he's doing now to the people there. So I think it's still like going on today that our government continues to support these dictators and fascist dictators and terrible people, and it's all because of racism, money. So it's just a big mess. But I'm glad you're able to bring that up, Crispin. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. Which actually makes a good transition into our next part, which is, Northern and Southern natives. I wanted to bring up a little, not so much story, but a video that I had watched. And there was this Central South American person that was advocating, for mestizaje, and saying how those that are that they would view as Hispanic mestizo cannot be indigenous because they believe that tribes won't accept them, one, or two, or won't recognize them, or two, is that they can't be indigenous because of how they look, because they have some sort of a European feature. They can't possibly call themselves indigenous. It's silly, isn't it? To me.
Yeah, it definitely is. I've heard that said from, I'm not going to drop her name, but
Sure.
I might reference her to you later. But there's this Chicana woman who's like heavily on the mestizaje identity, and she's like a Catholic too. And she was more on that first reason of thinking, to where it's like, oh, even if we identify with our tribes, they'll never accept us because we're mestizos or mestizas, And that, even me not being a Southern native, that's just, I know that's not correct, because granted, this is reading a book, but this book was talking about the indigenous population in Mexico. And one of the things that they were saying was, basically, if you're a full blood raised in a mestizo community, quote unquote, they're going to see you as mestizo, even if you're phonetically full blooded, you're 100% native DNA. And then the book is called Mexico Profundo, by the way, in case you ever want to check that out. But so on the other hand, if you're a mestizo and you're raised in a full-blooded community with your tribe, and your practices, your customs, your dances, language, they'll see you as Indio. So it's not the set in stone thing that they're making it out to be. And it's like, yeah, there's people that are mixed in the north and the south. The thing is, though, too, like with colorism, that plays a heavy part into it too.
Mm.
But from an indigenous thought pattern, we didn't really look at skin color, because I'm not saying that we were ashamed of the skin we were in, but we all came from such diverse regions that it would be impossible for everyone to have the same look. So how can you expect, even within a big country like Mexico or Peru, for everyone to all look the same?
No.
Which that's one thing I've like thought about. Like I have actually this meme on my phone. Eventually I'll put it up on the podcast, I suppose. But it shows like 100% Native American woman. She's Triqui from Mexico, and me and her have like a similar skin tone. And right, I'm only 50%. So that's why the whole point of it was like skin tone isn't everything. And I guess like yes, like I would say like on a lot of ways, if you're Southern Native, like and maybe even Northern, like the more indigenous you are, probably the darker you are. I mean, that might be a pattern, but we're pretty closely related to Asians, and you have white skinned Asians in Japan and really brown skinned Asians in Thailand, and yet they're still Asian. So that's another point I always bring up.
Right. And this might be kind of jumping the gun a little bit. Marcus, you just let me know if I'm going off script here or whatever, but like kind of the colorism aspect of North and South too. Really, all of the Americas, that's one difference between us and Asia, is that in pre-colonial times, we didn't have a concept of, oh, hey, lighter skin is more beautiful, or it's more feminine. That did exist in East Asia prior to European colonization. So it's like, I would say it's colorist, but I can't exactly call it like white centric necessarily, because if it's in their beauty standard before, then how can you attribute it to Europeans if it was already there? But we didn't have that. And I feel like a lot of natives will go more off your features rather than your skin tone. And I think it's not a foolproof method either, but it's a little bit better,
No, I agree.
Especially
Sorry. Especially what?
If you know what your own tribe's like facial features are, and or even if it's just a tribe related to your tribe or just a generic region, like a specific region.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm glad you brought that up though. Like, pre-colonial times, like, I mean, if you look at pictures of ancient China, they show like the women that look almost mostly white because of like the makeup and whatnot. So looking more white obviously was seen as more beautiful and has nothing to do with like Europeans at all in China and these Southeast Asian countries as well. And I'm sure there's more countries that maybe in the Middle East and in the Indian subcontinent. I think that's what they called it, back then as too. Which brings me to my question is that, I always was curious on the thoughts of what Northern natives, what they thought about like so-called, Hispanics, mestizos. And if you know of any like that, maybe what they might think of someone that is trying to indigenize and say that they are, native and no longer wanting to associate with, mestizo Hispanic anymore. Do you see that there is support for that?
It depends on which individuals you're talking to. If it's me and my friends, my inner circle, I mean, most of my friends are Southern Native. I'm not going to deny that, but I have Northerners on my wall too.
Sure.
My life that are friends with. But the thing is, there's always going to be people who look at it like, oh, well, Southern Natives, they don't have federal recognition and they're not indigenous to the United States and blah, blah, blah. And there's kind of this weird double standard that a lot of people have. It's like, well, they're not enrolled, so they're not authentically Native American. But it's like, okay, but if they're indigenous to another part of the Americas, well, and it's not the US and Canada, you as someone who is from the US or Canada, and myself included, really, it's not our place to tell them that they're not indigenous. Like a lot of people are going to be like, oh, it's a political, I forget how it was phrased. It's a political thing. It's a legal thing, this and that. And, they tie it into those who are on the res that are just all about enrollment. They're like, if you're not enrolled, you're not native, but they'll act like that's the form of sovereignty that we've always wanted. And it's like, it's really not, because like I was talking about earlier with even just the whole not doing anything about the missing and murdered Indigenous women thing. I think only recently, I don't remember what year, but tribes got the right to prosecute non-native offenders who did that. to our sisters. So, but before that, it's like it was up to white law enforcement agencies and they didn't care. So nothing really came of it. So if we were truly sovereign, we would have never had to rely on the government for anything, any kind of justice. And you know what I mean? Solving murders. Yeah. Can we really say we're sovereign? Like, okay, we do get recognition from the fact, you know, from the government, depending on what your tribe is. Maybe you're state recognized, maybe you're federally recognized, whatever. Maybe you're both. But the thing is, it's still Uncle Sam's final word on whether or not, you know, you're going to be recognized or not. So it's a lot of people in the North have kind of bought into this idea, but it's very colonial. And we might not have the mestizo identity crisis per se, but we do have kind of this other mentality that's kind of self-defeating. And I think that's one of them. I'm not saying that those who were enrolled should just throw away their enrollment or anything. I'm just saying understand it for what it is. You know, you were that tribe and your people were that tribe long before the white man came. You'll be here long after he's not around anymore, or if he is ever not around anymore. So if you're smart about it, if we're all smart about it.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I feel that for those that, you know, so-called Hispanics that are, you know, left-leaning, what they oppose of, you know, people such as me and others that want to, you know, indigenize, they feel that we are trampling on the rights of like indigenous people and tribes, saying you can't like say you're suffering and someone in a tribe suffering are completely different. So therefore you cannot say that you're indigenous.
Well, I wonder if they would apply that same level of thinking to people of Eurasian descent compared to people that are fully Asian, or people that are classified as mulatto compared to a full-blooded African. So like, why that double standard with Spanish-speaking natives?
I mean, yeah, that is a good point. That's like somebody telling Barack Obama, "You're not black because you don't suffer like the blackest person over there in Alabama," right? Yeah. That would make sense. It's like you have to go to the logic they use, which I just think is faulty, is you have to have this specific box, right? You have to fit in the specific box of suffering, and if you suffer in this other way, well, then it's not the same as this box, so therefore your identity is invalid. I'm just like, how? I just don't see how that makes any sense. Like, yes, acknowledge the fact that tribal natives, and especially you know, a lot of those in Mexico, they are discriminated against, but that doesn't negate a person's identity. It doesn't negate their genetics, you know, their DNA, what they are.
Yeah, because you have like those, you know, from south of the US border that are like obviously 100% native or 95% indigenous. And then you have people that are adopted like me that are also, you know, mostly indigenous. But and yet like we're still pushed away or saying that we can't be indigenous or native, which I think not only is a colonial like type of thinking, but it's also like it's unfair, I think, especially to adoptees as well, because people like us don't have any connections to, you know, our biological family, and we just want to, you know, further pursue our indigenous identity and, you know, support others as well that are indigenous. So the pushback it's silly to me, I think. But you know, I wanted to, you know, touch on a little bit more. I think we kind of went through like, you know, Northern natives, you know, thoughts on, you know, Southern natives. It's very interesting. I don't know how many, I think because it was what you said about Mexicans marrying and dating. What was the name of the tribe again? It started with a Y?
Yakima.
Yakima. Okay. Yeah. That's really fascinating to me. Are there a lot, and you said there are a lot of Southern natives in Washington and Seattle area?
Yeah, I don't want to say a lot. I mean, do you consider 9% a lot?
No.
No, I mean, I guess there's like a notable amount, right? But not a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm gonna just don't hold me to this because I might be going off old statistics here. But from what I remember about Seattle's racial demographics, the last one I read, it was like 69% white, I believe 16% Asian, 1% Native. It might be a little bit more than that, like Northern Native. And then blacks, they said 7%, Southern Natives 9%. But see, my thing is because of the whole Hispanic thing, and I told you guys that I do see a lot of Criollos and Criollas out here. How much of that is like muddled because of that useless term, kind of, the misnomer. The numbers get muddied up, and I don't know what the true indigenous population here is because of that. Because you do have a lot of Criollos out here of the variety that actually want to try and claim Aztec or even Chichimeca, and they're like Criollos. It's like their ancestors would have been hated by those people. So, but they're using the fact that the white liberals in this state and just a lot of other people don't know any difference. They won't know the difference between a Mexican indigenous person and a Spaniard. So they're just like, hey, I'm ambiguously brown. I'm a little darker than these white people. So I'll just say that I'm an Aztec, man. I'm from Aztlan.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, yeah, you are right. A lot of white people are clueless because, like, when it comes to that, look, because I've had people where I shit you not. I think there's this one. Yeah, there's this one person I knew, an acquaintance, and she kept calling me the name. I'm gonna make up a name. I don't want to use real names here, but she kept calling me, let's say, Pedro, right? Or because she got me confused with a guy named Pedro. But Pedro was from Puerto Rico, and Pedro was obviously like 80, 90, something around there percent white. And she kept confusing me for Pedro. I'm like, how are you confusing me for Pedro when I'm like 50% indigenous? Like, I look indigenous, I'm pretty brown. Like, so it's like, how are you getting us mixed up? Like, we're obviously not the same fucking race. Like, I just thought that was insane. Like, I pointed it out to her, and she was like, and then she like thought about it and was like, oh, I didn't really think about it. But it's because, like, I just think this whole Hispanic thing is like such a powerful illusion that people like have just trained their eyes to lump us all in together. They like their eyes can't even separate what the fuck's in front of them at this point. Like, it's just all the same together. I don't know.
Yeah.
Crazy, bro.
Before we move on to the next part, I actually did want to say something. You did say that it was a misnomer, mestizo and whatnot. So can I ask you, like, what your perspective on that word, like, is as a Northern Native?
I meant Hispanic and Latino as a misnomer, but yeah, since you guys told me about the meaning of mestizo and mestizaje centering whiteness, then yeah, because I used to think it was an okay enough word only because I was looking at it from a demographic standpoint and talking about somebody who they might not be 50-50, but they're indigenous. Let's say they're 75% indigenous and maybe 25% Spanish or something, someone like that. And then I was looking at mestizo almost as a way to re-indigenize because I didn't know any better. I was like saying, hey, is that a way that you can get Southern natives to identify with their indigenous roots? Because if you look at the demographics for Mexico, look at it for Peru, Guatemala, you got very high indigenous populations. And then there's the population that they classify as the mestizo majority. So Peru, I believe, has the most full bloods out of any. Yeah, it's got more full bloods than anywhere. I think Guatemala is second.
Yeah, Bolivia is pretty up there too. Oh yeah, I guess I did want to know about what your thoughts were on Hispanic and Latino as well, because you brought that up too, like you said, as a misnomer.
It's funny because now I can only speak on my own perspective. Like there was a point when I didn't know, I never really considered Mexican Spanish, or it's like I did, but I didn't. It's kind of stupid. I don't know if you ever seen that movie, The Mask of Zorro with Antonio Banderas in it, but it's like you got a bunch of Spaniards on there that have kind of gotten their skin bronzed and they're playing Mexicans or whatever. And you saw a lot of that in the 90s. I think the Mexica movement were talking about that too when they were around. But so like there was a bit of that confusion from a cinematic standpoint. And then really overall though, for whatever reason, I thought Mexicans were their own race. I didn't really understand race as I understand it today until I want to say teenage years going into early 20s, you know, because they don't really teach you much in school. You know what's weird? As much as they don't really talk about Northern Native history in the classes here, like they summed it up in like 2 or 3, I want to say, pages in a history book. They didn't teach anything about Southern Natives. Not one mention.
Yep.
The only thing I remember from my own history was just like the cookie cutter, Hernan Cortez, Moctezuma, the Aztecs fell, and then it led to a mestizo population. That's the only thing I remember from history class, that they just briefly went over that shit.
They didn't even go into that here.
Shit.
Yeah.
I was you know how we talked about like Southern Northern Natives and their thoughts on Southern Natives? I thought this was interesting. I was gonna ask you if you knew, but I seem to like see like online, or I see examples that like a lot of Lakota people seem to think that we're indigenous, but that's just from what I've seen. I don't know if you've noticed that.
Are we talking about like elders or youth, or because?
Oh, I don't know. I guess just in general. Like, well, I mean, I don't know. I've seen like quite a bit of them where they're like, "Oh yeah, you guys are," and they've been in pages before. But
That's good to
I mean
hear.
that's just like my own antecedent experience, right? I don't know. That's just what I'm basing it off of.
I had seen a lot of them that were anti-Mexican personally with that tribe. I'm not saying that they all are, but you know, a lot of Northern Natives that you're going to see this mostly with Southwestern tribes. They're going to be like, well, you know, Geronimo's family was killed by Mexican soldiers, which they were, I mean. And so like a lot of people are going to use that justification to hate Mexicans. And it's like, okay, but even if you saw that as a valid reason, that more holds for the Southwestern tribes. I don't really think Lakota's ever fought Mexico as a nation. So I don't quite understand what their beef is, but I'm glad a lot of them are waking up from that. There is, I don't know if this is actual, I think an Apache person would be better to ask about this particular thing that I'm mentioning, but there's been speculation as to whether the people that killed Geronimo's wife, daughter, and mother, I think it was, whether or not they were criollos or misguided mestizos. It might have been a mix of both. And I'm saying mestizo not to disparage. I'm just using it in the context of to mean like a culturally brainwashed native person of mixed blood.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean, man. Yeah, I'd heard about that too, about how Mexicans, I mean, like Mexicans have attacked like those Southwestern tribes, like especially the Apaches, and I think the Comanches might have fought them as well. But so there is that sour history, but yeah, I mean, it definitely sucks, man. It definitely sucks, but you know, a lot of those tribes up there, even before they reached those tribes, though, like mine, like the Guachichil and a lot of these Chichimeca tribes, I mean, they were on the frontier. They were fighting these people before, and then obviously they got assimilated eventually, and then they kept going up and up. So it's like, you know, a lot of the like we're descendants of those people, a lot of us. So it's like we're also victims of it, you know, to an extent.
That's kind of the point that I try to make to those who would make that argument, because as bad as the Apaches had it, and I'm not saying that any one tribe, I'm not playing the oppression Olympics with our own people here, but one point I want to make is that, like, when people talk about what Mexico did to the Apaches, they did a lot worse to the Yaquis. Like, personally, like, I would say the US and Mexico, it was a joint operation. And I'm not Apache, so I shouldn't be speaking too much on it, but I mean, I can, but it's just better from them. But what I will say is, like, from what they've told me, it was a joint operation, and obviously in charge of Mexico was the Spanish. So of course, whether there was mestizos on the ground or not, it was the Spanish generals. And what I don't like about that argument, though, is that you take the Apaches, who, yeah, they fought white, black, and Mexican soldiers, as well as tribal scouts that were against them, some from even their own tribe. So like the Apaches, it was them against the world at that point. But the thing about that is they'll use Geronimo as like a pro-border talking point. But Geronimo, I don't think he liked white people either. So they use this argument like, oh, Geronimo hated Mexicans and blah, blah, blah. And he was friends with white people. He was in some of these presidential parades. It's like, I really don't think he had a choice in that case. And from what I hear, he killed white women, men, and children. So he was not playing with those people. And whereas Mexican children got adopted into the tribe, something along. I don't think I've heard of white people getting adopted. And again, I'm not like I'm not like an expert or anything, but this is just from what I've been able to ascertain from conversations with actual Apaches. So I'm not as well versed in the Comanche thing, but it's kind of the same situation. Conquistadors harassing them first, then Mexico as a colonial state, then the U.S.
Yeah.
And actually, I wanted to transition into the YouTube channel, but I mean, I'm not the YouTube channel. I'm sorry, the video that you brought up to us. But that is an interesting point that you brought up, Crispin, was how like the generals of during the colonial era, the generals are usually Spanish, and then most of the what would you call them? I guess the grunts would be generally natives, or what they would see as mixed natives, or even darker skinned Spanish people. Again, I had read an article where the Spaniards are really the mestizos, not the native people, because a lot of Spanish people consist of like different, of DNA of different people, ethnic groups. But I wanted to bring up the YouTube channel video of Christopher Columbus. What was this man's name? I forgot, but what was it? Know It All?
Knowing Better. Yeah, it's called In Defense of Columbus, An Exaggerated Evil. I know you got to see it, but I don't know if Juan had.
Oh yeah, no, I watched it as well. Which, by the way, guys, we'll link that in the description for you guys to check out.
Yeah, that was.
This guy's gonna get dragged.
Huh?
He said that guy's probably gonna get dragged from our supporters if they get on that video.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like this guy here. First,
all right, so like I'm like, my take on it, right, is okay. I learned some stuff, right? I would say, for like, if he's to be believed, right, from the sources he used, right, some of the flack that Christopher Columbus gets is false. Then in that case, however, a lot of the shit that he was saying that people say about Christopher Columbus, I'd never fucking heard in my life. Like, and for the other stuff, like the guy just seemed like an apologist. Like, for example, he was saying that the encomiendas, like the natives, weren't slaves. He was saying, oh, and his logic was they weren't slaves because they weren't sold. And I just was like, yeah, but they were still forced to work with, they couldn't just leave. So how is that not slavery? Forced labor is pretty much slavery. It's the same thing. But that was a big gripe I had with him. The natives, Marcus, I don't think they were getting paid. They really didn't have a choice in the matter. I mean, they would get food to survive, but they couldn't just leave the encomienda. Yeah.
Oh, that was the thing that really got my blood boiling. Was he had said that they were like, what do you say, serfs or something?
Yeah, like peasants. He said no. Yeah, he said they were peasants, and the Spanish people were the lords. So he wanted to make it seem like it was like Europe. It was exactly like that. It's like, no.
I hate that argument. I mean, and it's really sad. Not sad, just like I said, it angers me because this isn't even from some pro Hispanista. This is from like an out, non-native person, saying these ridiculous things. I don't think he understands that there were natives that were forced. They were forced to work there. That it was slavery. A lot died. A lot were forced to work until they died. The mines that they were, slaved in, forced to find silver. If they escaped, they would go and try to find them, catch them, and then they'd have their hands chopped off, fingers cut off. I don't know about you, but that it's slavery to me.
Yeah, I mean, if you can't fucking leave and you have to do this, like, what? It's just intellectually dishonest to be like, oh no, it's not slavery on a mere technicality because they weren't sold, which I disagree with. Natives were sold in certain places. I know that my ancestors, the Guachichil, were enslaved by the Spanish and sold. So you can miss me with that bullshit.
Yeah, the thing that I took issue with too is he's talking about me and Marcus were talking about this a little before the show, but the whole 100 million thing. And I was saying how all colonizers can ever do is speculate on the numbers, but I think 100 million is a pretty safe, estimate. There's a book I need to read called American Holocaust. I forget
Oh
the name of
yeah,
it.
I've been meaning to
somebody-
read that one and the Guns, Germs, and Glory thing too. I've been meaning to
Yeah.
read that one too.
See, like those are white sources, but I feel like they're actually going to link their sources as to how they come to those numbers. Whereas if you look at the apologists, a lot of them try to minimize what the population number was. They'll be like, 15 million, 12 million in all of North America. It's like, how would you know? You weren't here. All you can do is fucking speculate. And then on top of that, I'm pretty sure if we started having diseases and people just dropping dead from diseases without even having seen the people, like if 90% of our population died off before we ever saw a white, I think we would have had some oral tradition, like oral stories about that and be like, what's going on? Why are so many people dying? And it's like, no, a lot of the smallpox and stuff that happened in my tribe were well into the 1600s and 1700s. There was like smallpox outbreaks, it was well after they got here. So I'm not buying that. And I'm not buying the whole, it was unintentional as far as the disease thing. And then he used the Black Plague and how that wiped out 50 to 60% of Europe. But it's like, I don't know, for the same thing that killed them over there was not being hygienic. That was what was killing them over there. And then that their non-hygienic nature over here killed us. And he was saying, like, because we didn't have domesticated animals, blah, 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 we weren't as used to the animal-borne diseases. And one thing he said, too, that was interesting, he's like, we would have never gotten as high technologically because we didn't have draft animals. Well, first of all, like Marcus's ancestors, no doubt, would have domesticated llamas, which he mentioned in the video. But it's weird that he said guinea pigs and llamas, and it's like, are you forgetting dogs? And as for horses, there was evidence of at least 13,000 years ago there was horses in this continent, and I'm looking more into it because I want to find out as more information comes. But there seems to be some evidence and just arguments that are put out from a lot of our people out there that they didn't bring all the horses with them, that there were some horses that the conquistadors, when they were in the southeast, they weren't able to account for certain breeds of horses. So maybe the horse was new to some tribes in terms of when the colonizers came, but other tribes might have actually had them. And I don't know. I think we need to do more research. I don't know if I would say that, because why did we get so good with horses if we didn't know about them? The general story in the Southwest is that the conquistadors, a lot of them lost a lot of horses during the Pueblo Rebellion, which the Pueblo Rebellion was over slavery with the Pueblo speaking tribes of the southwestern states. They were enslaved, I believe, in, what did you call them? What was the Spanish word?
Oh, encomiendas.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was that kind of slavery. So for him to say that it wasn't slavery when literally a rebellion that happened in 1680 that temporarily drove the Spanish out of New Mexico ends up in a way kind of creating the horse cultures in a lot of these tribes, because a lot of these horses just went wild. And I guess the Southwest was kind of similar in some ways to some of the Spanish steppe areas, in that the wildlife, like the grass, was enough for the horses to live off of. And I guess the temperature was similar, so they were able to sort of thrive there. And these tribes basically became better horsemen than the Europeans did, like the Comanches.
Right. So one interesting point I was going to throw out is like people like him that'll say, oh, well, the disease thing was unintentional, so therefore they had no blood on their hands. I find it interesting that he says that, yet you'll have people that, when the pandemic is still going on, right? But it was pretty bad a couple months ago or a year ago. And people were saying, well, if you don't wear your mask, you don't get vaccinated, then you're killing people. So people will acknowledge, oh, you are killing people because of the COVID-19 shit, but they won't acknowledge that Europeans killed Native Americans. They won't hold them accountable for what they did. And the Europeans knew what the fuck they were doing. They had biological warfare in Europe. They would, for example, there was ways you could do it. So you could kill people and throw them into the water source for like Europeans had in cities, and then that would affect the water. People would die off of disease from that. You had the chicken pox, blankets that he mentioned. So like they knew what they were doing. And at best, I mean, at worst, you could say that it was just negligence, which, you know, you would, in a court of law, you would still be convicted over something like that anyway. So that's just my point. And then, I wanted to bring up this comment because we were talking about the death tolls. Ancient Americans did leave a comment on one of our second video. So he said, a word about these death toll estimates, if I may. These estimates are certainly not without controversy, but I did want to provide some context as to how they are calculated. They come from census numbers that were taken in New Spain after the conquest. I'm not sure how these censuses were done, so I can't comment on the accuracy or the quality of the numbers. However, these figures do document a huge population drop in the decades after the conquest. These drop rates are then applied to the pre-Columbian population estimates of other areas in the Americas, which again are also just estimates and not solid numbers. So it's not a surprise that the die-off estimates range widely. Not a perfect method of calculation by any means, but it's the best we have for now. Another thing to keep in mind is that even though disease is often quoted as the main killer, slavery, warfare, and dispossession were also important factors in the subsequent population drop. So that's what he commented on one of our videos.
Yeah. And one other thing I wanted to talk about the encomiendas really quick was that, you know, they were given to Spaniards, and along with like the land was given to them, a little piece of land, and natives were given to them as well. So obviously this is a form of slavery, as the Spaniards were there, the encomienderos were there to tend the land and also do what they wanted to do with the indigenous people that were on that land as well. Again, like I said, if they wanted to get out, they couldn't escape. They were stuck there. Like we have that picture when we talk about encomiendas, of that picture where they're I think they're working for the Spaniards and moving things around, and you see like a little housing area that's for the indigenous people to stay.
Yeah, you see guards there too.
And you see guards.
Why are you going to have guards if it's not slavery?
Yeah,
right.
He was
or at best a prison camp, which what is prison really but legalized slavery?
Yeah.
No, yeah, exactly. So he was making light of the situation. So yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
no, you're good. You're good.
I was just gonna say the whole technological argument too. What they always want to bring up the wheels and the horses and this and that, and it's like, oh, you can't have civilization without domesticated animals. It's like maybe that's true for you, but clearly the Incas did. I mean, they had the llamas, but I think their roads were not fitted for something. Maybe it wasn't because it's the mountain or something. It's not ideal. I can't remember what the thing was about that. But, you know, you got the Aztecs, and then you got the Mayans, and they got these books that were burned by the Spanish. And sure, like with tribes, lower 48 tribes like mine, a lot of us didn't have writing systems, but like my people recorded our history in wampum strings. So I mean, it's almost like a form of writing, you could say, because it's still recorded on there. You just got to know how to read it. But what people don't realize is a lot of the writing systems started off as paintings once upon a time anyway. So maybe we're just closer to our roots in that regard. But the other thing that's funny to me is like, okay, so you have a lot of Europeans, especially probably Criollos, but you know, English too. They'll be like, oh, most natives didn't have writing systems before we got here. And even when you look at some of these sources that talk about our actual accomplishments, like this one book I have called the Encyclopedia of American Indian Inventions, something like that. I might have to send you guys a link to it, but it's a good book to get. It talks about our contributions for 15,000 years. And one of the things about that is, so there was at least 12 writing systems, and the Europeans will be like, oh, well, that's nothing. But my question is, so what's worse, being a mostly pre-literate rate, not illiterate, pre-literate, you didn't have writing systems. So what's worse, to have that or to have a writing system and still have most of your population, like 90%, be illiterate, which was the case in Europe? How are you civilized?
Mm-hmm. That's right. And like the Aztecs, you know, showered and bathed, and that was a very common thing there, unlike like in Spain, where I don't think being as hygienic was very common. Um, I think one point that I also wanted to add for you, Crispin, was like when he said that like you can't have large cities without animals. I mean, hello, like he didn't even bring up Tenochtitlan or the Incan Empire, or in Cusco.
Mm-hmm.
Like Tenochtitlan. Sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say Tenochtitlan was seen as like, if not bigger than any city in Europe.
Bigger than London and Paris, for sure.
Yeah. So I don't know what he was smoking, but it wasn't very good.
I mean, there's also the whole thing about the intention of the genocide and whether or not that's genocide. I mean, you from a technical standpoint, I guess you could make that argument, but I don't know why you would want to. I mean, you could make that same argument that, like, he uses Hitler as he's objectively worse than Columbus. It's like, that depends on who you ask. But the legacy that he created killed more people than Hitler did, and it's just that they had better records in World War II. But the problem with that is the fact that, how do I put this? Like, even in those situations, death tolls with that many bodies in a concentration camp are going to be hard to actually. They changed the numbers up a lot, So there's that factor, and there's just the factor of originally the plan was to deport a lot of Jews, not kill them, or maybe it was the plan to kill them all along. But it's like it kind of everything kept changing on the go, Because like if you look at situations like Schindler's List, I mean, obviously he was considered one of the better people, but he kept Jews alive by having them make ammunition for the German army, and that wasn't the only person to have them do that. So a lot of them were kept alive to, build for the war effort. So you could make that same counter argument with them. Oh, they didn't mean to kill them. They just died because of the shitty conditions in the camp. Like what?
Yeah.
And
like that's like if I fucking took a kitten and put it in a box with no air. It's like, oh, I didn't kill the kitten. He just wasn't strong.
And the box killed the kid, bro. Not you.
The box is full. Dang box. At it again.
Yeah, that is a really excellent point. Like how they count the death toll, regarding the Nazis and the Jews. The conditions of the camp, they factor that in as part of the death toll, and they blame that on the Nazis as a war crime. But then they won't extend that same logic to natives here. Interesting.
Yeah, it is. Definitely, this guy needs to do a little bit more research, I'd say, on his understanding of Incamian as an overall like pre-Columbian or colonial history.
See, the funny thing is, I'm sure if this guy was to ever see our taking of this, and then he figures out why he's getting dragged all of a sudden more, he's gonna be like, I already addressed this in my second video, because he's got a second video where he's kind of, I don't know. I might have to send you guys that one too to see what you think. Maybe we could do a follow-up sometime. But the thing is, even if he's accounted for it with other people, he hasn't accounted for it with us. So we have the right to weigh in on that when it's our people that he's talking about. And he had another video where he was talking about the Standing Rock protests that were pretty cringeworthy too. I might want to pass that around to people too, I want to see if anybody can debunk some of what he's saying, because a lot of what he's talking about has to do with a lot of the old treaties with different Sioux bands, Lakota bands and whatnot. So someone more versed in like the treaty talk as far as a lot of what he references in that would be better equipped to talk about it than me. But I don't want him feeling like he could say too much without backlash.
Yeah.
No, you're good. No worries. I remember there was one point that I wanted to bring up a little bit earlier in the podcast when you're saying how, you're 6'2" and your native friend was 6'7" or something, but
he was just a guy I met that was from my tribe, but yeah,
it seems that like, at least there were a lot, natives in the north seem a lot taller because, in Guatemala and other countries, Peru and Mexico, it seems, well, I don't know, for me, because I'm like almost 6'3", but a lot of natives were a little bit shorter than northern natives are.
Now, would you say that's would you say that applies to the full bloods or not? Because like one thing is like a lot of the Spaniards that came over here, I mean the Spaniards are kind of short in general, bro. So I don't know if the I'm 5'6", I'm really short compared to you guys. So I don't know if the fact that I'm 5'6" is more attributable to like the fact that I'm almost half Spaniard or the fact that I'm like half Southern Native. I'm a lean towards the Spaniard thing to blame it on. I don't know.
I got a theory, at least.
All right, let's hear it.
It might be both, but so like the Guachichil are considered in the umbrella term to be Chichimeca, right?
Yeah, they're part of the Chichimeca. They're one of the tribes that would fall into that category.
So like obviously the southern and central Mexican tribes are a lot shorter. Like I've seen these memes. I think I've sent one of them to you, the Chad Chichimeca meme and the Virgin Conquistador, and there's variations of that where there would be like these 6 foot tall Chichimecas, and I'm like, I know that some tribes in the desert might have actually been a little bigger in stature, like if they ate more meat compared to maybe the Aztecs. Like the Aztecs ate meat, but they didn't eat nearly as much as a desert tribe or like the really far north tribes. Like some of the biggest plains people in the U.S. were the plains at one point. Like the Cheyenne, especially with their buffalo hunting. And I think the diet factors into that, what you ate. Red meat, technically, you do tend to be bigger in stature than, say, if you just ate like fish or like chicken, which in Mesoamerica, even now, from what I'm told, beef is not as popular as, say, pork and chicken. So that might factor into it a little bit. But there's also the thing about like Mexican Americans being taller than Mexicans. So, I mean, I don't know how you feel about all that, but
I haven't really thought about that, like Mexican Americans being taller than a lot of Mexicans. Yeah, it's kind of funny. One thing that is funny is like, yeah, a lot of us are shorter. But like, yeah, I've noticed that like a lot of people like I'm like barely like taller, like maybe like a 1 or 2 inches, maybe 3 inches. Like, so I'm a little bit on the taller side for like a fucking Mexican, you know what I mean? But I'm not tall. That's what I'm saying. So it's kind of interesting.
yeah. So I'm just gonna be 100% honest with you. Like on the U.S. spectrum of things, you would be considered just below because it's 5'9" is the national average.
Oh, for Mexico or for the U.S.?
The U.S.
Okay, yeah, that's what I figured.
So
yeah, I was just saying like when I like am around other Mexicans, it seems like I'm usually like a little taller than a lot of them, just by an inch or two is what I'm saying. But maybe that just might be the people I'm around. They're just short.
Like, well, when you attribute the whole height and then the mixing aspect of it, I feel like with northern natives or just tall tribes in general, and this doesn't apply all across the way because I've got a Caucasian mom and a Mohawk dad. I mean, he's passed away now, but they're both 5'10". I'm taller than either one of them. But then I've seen other Mohawks that were mixed with white, and like some dudes would be like 5'8". And it's almost like mixing with white for some people in our nation makes people shorter, which is funny because you talk about Marcus's people being Peruvian, and they are a short people, but the actor Benjamin Bratt is half Peruvian Incan, and then he's half white. He's 6'2", so it's like maybe for Southern natives, like Anglo-Ag mixture makes you guys taller, but it's like for certain U.S. tribes, people shrink. The Lakota Nation used to be very tall, and I think they're not as tall now as they used to be, but you see some of their pictures of their chiefs, there's some pretty big guys, but I think the decline in their nutrition also played a factor.
Yeah.
Going from hunting bison on or they call them tatanka. I don't know if I said that right, probably not, but they were eating that, then they're suddenly eating, government commodity food. Of course, you're going to decrease in size.
Yeah, that's true.
I remember that I think I gave too much credit to being tall, to having the 20 however much percentage like European DNA, because again, like what Wanchaloa said, Spaniards are not tall generally, at least in Peru. The criollos, as you can call them. And I think I saw a comment that said that the conquistadors did see like natives in Peru or South America that were like some that were like 7 foot or something. So it could, attribute to diet or just like what we're putting in our body, um, which could be a reason why. I mean, I don't know what the usual diet is of a Peruvian. I imagine probably like
Pig.
potatoes and
Sorry, I had to throw that in there.
oh, guinea
Oh,
pig.
what do you say? Guinea pig?
Yeah, I know that the Incans love guinea pig to eat. They call it cuy.
Yeah, koi. That's right. I was in Peru and was asked to eat it a few times, more than a few, but I could not.
Really?
I had pet guinea pigs.
Oh
So
yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can see why you would.
yeah, and I
I
liked
don't
it.
know. It'd be kind of weird, but I would. I don't know. It's kind of a 50-50. I might try it
I
if I
think
ever
I
go.
would.
You would try, Crispin?
It's got to
Yeah,
be
man.
better than alligator meat. I didn't like alligator.
Oh, you didn't? Shit, I actually like that. Pretty good.
Didn't it taste like chicken or something? I heard.
Yeah, but with a little bit of spice to it.
Interesting. So yeah, transitioning to the other part was non-native dating, and my question was, I guess for you, Crispin, was that like those that are in tribes, is it's very uncommon for natives in tribes, or at least northern natives, to date outside their tribe, and if so, like do they maybe tend to does I don't want to say leave behind their culture, but does the connection to their culture does it become reduced because they're dating outside, out of their tribe and
I
maybe just
personally
non-native?
prefer that.
Sorry.
Oh no, I was just saying I feel like it does. You have I think city natives do date other tribes more than res. I think that's one key difference because you had a lot of urbanizing in the 60s going on, and a lot of people moved out of the reservations to have better jobs, and that's how you started having people from different tribes interacting with each other and marrying each other. If you go to a lot of reservations, it's just going to be that tribe there. So I guess it's a multi-layered answer because it would depend on how big that tribe is. Like the Navajo Nation, they're big enough to probably sustain themselves for a while with just their own tribe, especially on the reservation. I know they do mix out, but I see that more in the cities, and especially like cities like Phoenix and Albuquerque and places like that. And there's some of them up here, like yeah, it's the same thing. Um, the thing is, we dated not dated, but that's more of a modern thing. But we procreated with and married other tribes before colonization, so it's definitely a traditional thing to do. I would say that miscegenation, the procreating with other races, that's not pre-colonial. I mean, that I'm going to tie it back into what that guy was saying on that video a little bit. He was talking about how there was Viking settlements that were abandoned, and you always have these speculations. Oh, like northeastern natives had Viking DNA even before Columbus, blah blah blah. And it's like if this settlement that they made just to go look for timber was abandoned after 1 year. I mean, sure, yeah, there could have been some rapes, and the Vikings were certainly known for raping, but like, don't make it seem like that was a willing thing or like the whole tribe got changed forever. It would only apply to those descendants of if there were those rapes, and we don't even know. We need to talk to more Inuit people and see what they say about it because they were the ones that fought the Vikings. But a year is just not enough time to really do much in terms of that. Um, I think a lot of people make the argument that, oh, you can be a traditional half blood and you could care more about the culture than a full blood that just doesn't care. And it's like, that might still happen, but overall, the Southwestern tribes have the most full bloods, and they also happen to have the most traditionals, I think. I don't think that's a coincidence. And I think a lot of these people who are like, oh, it's about your culture, not your race. That's more of an East Coast thing, and a lot of East Coast tribes are watered down. My tribe and the other 6 nations are not as watered down as a lot of other Eastern nations, but a lot of us are pretty heavily admixed. And just any Eastern nation, really, to make that argument, like, you say that you can be traditional and be mixed, but it's like, okay, but are you? Because the majority of US natives do not speak an indigenous language. Navajos have the most speakers with over 100,000, but they're the only tribe north of Mexico with over 100,000 speakers. So most tribes, you could have a big tribe or a little tribe or whatever, and only a fraction is going to speak the language.
That's interesting. It's I say that because how many people in tribes don't speak the native language. Because even with us, like Southern natives, our ancestors were ripped from their native roots, long ago as far as culture. And even though we want to, re-indigenize and say that we are indigenous, finding the language and like what we spoke and trying to speak it is quite hard. Even for me, like trying to understand Quechua is difficult, but we could get on to my history another time. I think I wanted to bring up one point regarding that was, with dating, in your tribe, we had talked earlier before the podcast was that there is a lot of maybe some distrust from tribes on outsiders.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if outsiders, and I mean like non-native people, white, black, Asian, feel that distrust is justified, or do they think it's unfair?
I think they probably think it's unfair, but they can only ever see it from their point of view, and we can only ever see it from ours. Or we could say we know their point of view because we live in a colonial world and we have to walk in both their world and our own. So, like you were telling me earlier that you were talking to somebody from the Crow tribe, and there was distrust. I was happy to hear you say that because a lot of people in the US like to shit on the Crow, be like, oh, they were scouts for the US against the Lakota Nation and other tribes like that. And it's true that they were, but even in warrior tribes that were very anti-US, like my own, like the Lakota, like the Apache, like the Seminole, like Comanches, you always had, even in these anti-US tribes, you would have some sellouts. And I think that a sellout from your own tribe is going to do more damage than a scout from a tribe that's your rival, because the same tribe, all the intimate secrets, and I think with the Crow and other Plains tribes like that kind of sided with the U.S. Army because the Sioux were more powerful than them and they used to dominate them in combat. Just because your ancestors might have sold out or people from your tribe might have sold out, that doesn't have to be your destiny forever. Any of these tribes that have ill reputation can always redeem themselves in the modern era. If you don't want your tribe to be seen as a sellout tribe, start really just doing all you can for your tribe and other tribes and just being there for people, defending people, stick up for missing and murdered Indigenous women, stick up for the kids in cages. That's something you can do to and I'm happy to hear that a tribe that's very maligned has that. Some of them have that mentality, because it's like, even though they might have sided with the colonizers, I feel like a lot of them, maybe they feel like some of their ancestors made the wrong choice.
That's what I wonder with the Tlaxcalans as well in Mexico that, did side with the Spaniards. I wonder, I mean, I know that the caste system that was created, a lot of Tlaxcalans did some, I guess they were given some more rights than most of the native population, but still they were never seen, I don't think, as equals as the Spaniards that were there. And that would only get worse, during the independence movements and everything else. And not, I don't think I need to do more evidence on this, but I'm sure not all Kleshkolans were treated with these rights as well, because I had read a book. I think that I had read up about the perspective from conquistadors in Mexico, and they still like chained up these Kleshkolan people and made sure that they helped them on their way to the conquistadors on their way to colonizing more people and land. Um, so yeah, that's an interesting point of view. I guess my other question would be, so there's issues between tribes in the US. Like there's disagreements, but I wonder if they share one common goal, and that's their, strong opposition to, pro-colonial, governors or people in government that very much don't care for them. I would think so.
I got to find out more and do more outreach out here and, just abroad, because I feel like there was more resistance in the 60s and 70s in terms of like the activism, like the Alcatraz protest and Wounded Knee too. But I don't think a lot of youth are just very disconnected.
Sure.
Um, there was like a video I saw where it was being said that they were like in the 1900s, the majority of people were still traditional. Like even with the boarding schools starting to be in place, it's still colonialism was very new. The reservation system was newish, I want to say, for some people. And those people were more traditional, but it's like when you fast forward to the 90s, in this same video, they were saying that like 30,000 traditionals left in the US. I mean, that's sad back then. I can't imagine what it is now.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't imagine either. It's just a lot to think about. I wonder. Like, I was trying to persuade a northern native. Like he disagreed with a lot of what I said on Reddit, but I was like, well, I think we all share one, common goal, and that's, government officials that don't care about us, that we view as colonizers, pretty much. I think it's very evident in southern, in Mexico and in other countries south of Mexico as well, that there are, government officials, non-native government officials that don't want us there. And I think so. We all share one common. What is it? Your enemy is my enemy. The enemy of my friend is your friend. Something like that.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yeah, that.
Yeah.
And we very much agreed on that. And that there are, officials that really are racist and don't care about native lives, indigenous people. So anyway, the other part of this script I wanted to go over was, the boarding school, of course. So going on some current issues right now. At school in Canada, where 215, I believe, student, bodies were found. That's so terrible. And to know that wasn't even that long ago, and yet you see, priests and those that are trying to apologize for this matter, but how many of them knew of that already? Maybe they're just apologizing just to be like, oh, we got caught, better say sorry.
Yeah. You hear a lot of residential school survivors, especially older people. It's like a lot of them were beaten for speaking their language. I mean, that's obvious. I mean, anyone that has heard of this issue it's not going to be new what I'm saying to you, but a lot of elders now, I've known people where they'll have a grandpa or something or a grandmother that was in a residential school, and they basically, how do I put this? They didn't want to speak the language in the house, like even after the residential school days were long over with. And it's like when their grandkids would start to learn how to speak the language, they would just have a air of paranoia about it. And it's like, I kind of understand, like they did that to them. There was, from the next tribe over from mine, the Oneida, they're the closest to us, language wise and distance wise in the Six Nations. But I was reading a while ago, it was like a year ago maybe, about this Oneida elder who escaped one of those places. He was 6 years old, and he brought his little brother with him who was 4, and they were hiding from the Mounties in a cornfield. It's like, imagine you're 6 years old and you got to look after your little brother. It's like you're still a child yourself, but you're looking after your little brother. You're doing your duties in the way. I mean, that's what you would have done. It's a very traditional thing what he did, and it was his granddaughter telling that story. So her grandfather made it out. Like it is very unfortunate that, you know, so many children didn't make it out. But at the same time, we also got to prioritize kind of these survivors who did. And we got to look at those stories and not let it happen again.
Yeah.
You know, there's a school called the Mush Hole on Mohawk land up in Canada. On the Canadian side, they had this school called the Mush Hole, and it was called that. It was actually called Brantford School, but that school, it was called that because people, the mush referred to the food. It was very bad food that they were given to not even nourish them, but just to keep them alive, you know. And they forced the boys to get circumcisions. They gave is it tonsillectomy when you get your tonsil out?
Yeah, I think so.
So that was done to both genders, and both genders were molested. Now that boarding school was taken back in the 70s. You know, the people have it now. It's like a place of memory, you know, remembering the fallen. But the last boarding school, I believe, to be closed down was closed down in like the mid to late 90s. And that was from the Homolko tribe. I have a friend that's from that tribe, and his people are from Vancouver, BC, the Campbell River. They're a Salish speaking tribe. And I don't know if it was him or somebody else that was telling me that they were the last tribe in Canada to be invaded. I'm not sure. I might have to talk to him again, but for that school to just close down in the 90s, people are around from the 90s still. People are around from the 70s still. So when they're telling people to get over it and this and that, it's like these people never want to be told get over 9/11, where it was mostly not died in the Twin Towers. Although my people built those towers too, so you know, I could say that was an attack on our nation as well as the United States. But anyway, there's people alive from the 70s, there's people alive from the 50s, there's people alive from the 90s. So when are we supposed to get over it exactly, especially when this shit's still going on? And you know, it's not even just a male and female thing either, because you know, the priests were doing a lot of this shit, but so were the nuns. And there's this book that I have actually. It was a gift, but it was about the Navajo code talkers, and it was one of the original 29. His name was Chester Ness, and he was put in a boarding school. And he said that a lot of the nuns, or actually all the nuns, were actually other natives, like native women who themselves had been previously, you know, de-Indianized. I know that's not a word, but whatever. And they were repackaging colonialism on these Navajo children. And then flash forward from the 20s to World War II, now they're having to use that language and other tribal languages to basically save the country, using that as a code talk against the Germans and the Japanese. So I find that ironic and hypocritical.
I find that hypocritical too. It's, gosh, the fact that there were native nuns that also participated in this.
Yeah, speaking about the code talkers, it's interesting how they like the US will celebrate that, right? They'll say that they owe the victory because of that, and that's great, but they don't acknowledge the wrongs they did and discriminate against natives because they spoke their native languages. It's like if some of y'all had your way, you would have never been able to use these people's skills. Like, you would have been completely fucked. But they don't acknowledge that in history books.
The irony is, at least with the Navajos, it was like I want to say like a missionary dude who was living among the Navajo, and he was one of the few non-natives who knew how to speak their language, the Diné language, and he recommended using it as a code because it was mostly spoken and not written down. So that was why they were the largest language implemented in World War II.
Yeah, I always, when I read about World War II and whatnot, I always want to hear about like the code talkers and how if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be in the position that we are in because the Japanese couldn't understand. It's like an indigenous language. But I wanted to add though, like what you said, Crispin, was people saying get over it, you know? Or for example, the guy in the YouTube video, when he made it sound like, well, the Europeans suffered this too, or like got diseases and whatnot. But here's the thing though, is that the indigenous people don't really, I wouldn't say a country to call home where they can feel safe and not persecuted or attacked by colonial officials that are criollos in some cases that don't care so much for indigenous tribes, where people in Spain has, criollos, Spaniards have a place to call home, Spain. Italians, Portuguese, everywhere in Europe, there's countries there that's ran by officials that, that look like them. But in these South and Central American countries, of course, you could say Evo Morales was a native president, but how many presidents before him? How many other government officials are native or indigenous? Answer me that question. So when he says get over it, I was like, okay, yeah, I guess we could tell the indigenous people of Cuba and Dominican Republic to get over it too, even though there's barely any left, And one point that he brought up was like when he talked about servants. I don't mean to get off topic, like off a different topic, but when he said like how natives could be servants, and he was trying to be like, well, he meant servants of God or something. I was like, hello, like no one wants to be a servant of anyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was. Oh, on the whole get over it, dude. You know how many Southerners I found over here that are butthurt they lost the war and they still want to have their Confederate flags and not be called racist? Like, shouldn't they get over it?
Yeah.
Like, but no, they, God forbid you fucking say that to them. Jesus.
Right. And it's like whenever I make that point about 9/11, there's even some of our own people who will be like, oh, but there was natives that died in 9/11 and I don't want innocent people to die and blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, but you're missing the point here.
Yeah.
Like they like to say, oh, well, nobody that you knew was killed by the U.S. Army. And it's like, okay, well, if nobody that you knew died in the Twin Towers, you got no right to complain about it.
Yeah, it's faulty logic. Faulty
If they're going
logic.
by that criteria, then they got no right to speak on it by their own logic.
Yeah. I mean, let's go tell the Jews to get over the Holocaust. Get over it. It happened. But yeah, it's funny. Like people have empathy for all sorts of people and all sorts of struggle, but you bring up the indigenous and they automatically get so defensive, and it's like, yeah, it's mind-boggling.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is trying to punish us still for resisting so hard. And that's kind of the thing that I don't like about this modern day, not to like topic switch, but like with the left and everything, a lot of people would have you believe that natives owe our civil rights to that of other minority groups, or just the civil rights era. And it's like, what about all the centuries of anti-colonial warfare we did before there were cameras to record marches and shit like that? So it's like, just because you don't know about it doesn't mean it didn't happen. Mm-hmm. We have every right that we have by our own hands. And I don't think that's something our people are ready to hear yet, because I don't know, it's like we've got this dependence on the system, but if you start to admit that you can do more for yourself than you realize, it almost kind of gives you a what's your excuse kind of moment. What's your excuse to keep repackaging colonial thought?
Yeah. Good point, Crispin. I think that's an excellent transition to our final part, which is politics. Before I add on that, I really wanted to clear up my point about, telling people to get over it, like, and saying, like, Mayans get over it. Again, like saying that they don't have a place to call home. Is living in a country where it's ran by a government official such as Rios Montt and people that think like him really a safe place to call home? Same with the Zapistas in southern Mexico. They're being attacked by paramilitary groups and, obviously the military itself. Is that really a place you want to call home when you have officials and people in government that don't care about you? I could say the same thing about the Mapuches in Chile. Are they really at home and safe at home? A home is a place that you're supposed to feel, where you're secure. But that's not the case for the tribes. Of course, it's the case because Spaniards in Spain aren't being hunted down by government officials. There's no tribes in Spain that are being exterminated. But it's not the same. So he's comparing apples to oranges. Anyway, but I think I made my point somewhat clear. And then getting on to politics. You're talking about the left and the right, conservatism, and being conservative, liberals. So I was curious on, like, as far as like Crispin, the political direction, I think, for natives. Do you think? And I brought up, like, at least in the media, and a lot of media outlets that tend to lean left, really rarely show the injustices of Native American people, missing Indigenous women. I don't think, that's not obviously a good direction to go. So I was curious on your take on that, Crispin.
I think a lot of us, especially with this last election, have this mentality that you're going for the lesser of two evils.
Mm.
And I think that's really all it boils down to with the left. I mean, even just look at Trump versus Biden. Okay, like, I don't like Biden, but I will say it's good that Deb Haaland is in there. I think she could do some good. As much good as you can do in this colonial system when you're an Indigenous person. Hunwe, our word for Indigenous, you can be, she can do, I hope she does as much as she can, whatever the limitations are of that. But I think it's with the left, even just like looking at the stimulus packages, right? I think we got what, 1,200 from Donald Trump, and then wasn't the 600 under him too, or was that also Biden, or what was the deal?
Biden, I think there was.
I mean, yeah, I lost track too, but
You're good.
it's kind of like the things like that, the way they approach coronavirus, the differences and things like that. Our people are obviously gonna take whatever we think is the likelihood to save us more. But at the end of the day, Biden still has kids in cages. It might not be as bad of a, atrocities as what was happening under Trump, but it's still the same. It's like, even if it's the lesser of two evils, it's still evil. And is it even the lesser of two evils, or is it just the sneakier of two evils?
Yeah. That's I like that you brought that up. Like, because both, are, I personally, I don't agree with things on the left or the right. There's many things I disagree with. And obviously the kids in cages is still a big problem. And it still hasn't been completely addressed. And they're still there under the Biden administration. I wanted to ask you though, Crispin, do tribes tend to, I guess, in the Northwest part of the country, they tend to lean left or vote Democratic?
I would say overall, most probably will vote left. I mean, I'm not exactly going out there and asking people, because it's like, even if those of our own are voting left or right, it's like there's almost kind of a frustration that our people want to participate in the system anyway as it is. So I'll almost avoid that, but maybe I'll start talking to more people. But I've got friends, of course, that weren't necessarily leftist, but they voted for Biden because saw Trump as worse, which I can kind of agree. You know, he definitely was, but overall, the left doesn't have our back, and the right doesn't have our back. I mean, tying back into what I was saying a little bit earlier, you know, with the Nazis and everything, it's kind of a stereotype at this point, but people compare right wingers to Nazis, and then they compare the left to communists, and it's like, you know what? With the left, lesser of two evils thing, it's like, yeah, that's exact counterparts, because, and like one of the things that's the difference between Nazis and communism, I'm tying it into a larger point, so just bear with me, but the left will often say, and I know that they don't want, a lot of leftists don't want like to be compared to communists, and communists don't like to be compared to leftists, like they're like the extreme versions of each other. But anyway, the difference between Nazism and communism is you don't have people saying about Nazism, well, true Nazism hasn't been tried, you know. I mean, so in a way, I would tie that into the way the left is, you know, historically speaking, the right was very evil towards us. You had Abraham Lincoln lynching Dakota Sioux basically for defending themselves in their own territory. And the argument that they make for that is, oh, he had to lynch some people because the settlers wanted to kill way more than that. And he was just killing that amount to appease the white majority or some bullshit. So there you have an anti-native legacy with the Republicans. Then you have with the left, you have Andrew Jackson, the first Democrat president, signs the whole removal act, and then you got the Trail of Tears and everything that went with that. So if we want to move forward, we got to go backwards and look at how they were and look at how they are now. And it's like, yeah, they've changed in some ways, but the way that they haven't changed, it's like, in my opinion, the Democratic Party is very in line with Black culture, and like in some cases Black radical identity groups, radical Black identity groups. And then with the Republicans, it's a very pro-white party. And any minorities you see are going to be tokens at best. So it's like, which sinking ship do we want to drown in?
Yeah, I wouldn't want to sit, drown in either one.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, so get a canoe and escape. That's I mean, I don't know how we can fully implement that going forward in the future, but that's my metaphor that I would use for getting away from the left and the right.
Yeah, as much as I would like to just, find a nice boat and then, go to Fiji or some nice island. I know that, my responsibility is to be here and find out what we can do for, our brothers and sisters and, Indigenous people that do need more light shed on their problems, because it's becoming more common. I think, like you said, the left does, I think a lot of people on the left in higher up positions do ignore our pleas for help and our problems. Same could be on the right as well. So I think that there does need to be more coverage and more spotlight for those problems. But yeah, we do what we can. I'm glad that we could have this podcast and talk about a lot of these issues that aren't covered by them. Hey, Crispin, I think you said you had a solution that you're going to add on. Maybe briefly discuss northern southern relations.
Yeah, I've got some friends that are Brazilian and Bolivian, and that they're very smart, and a couple of them have mentioned to me, and this ties into the colorism aspect. And a few of my friends that are Southern natives were surprised when I tell them that in the North, with a lot of cases, it's the lighter skinned natives that are seen as inferior, like the half breed is walking between two worlds, the Indian world and the white world. So despite this, though, and a friend of mine that's Six Nations like myself, he told me how it is because he grew up out there and I didn't. But he was saying that a lot of the mixed-blooded, light-skinned natives used to, back in the 50s or something like that, hate on or make fun of the darker-skinned more pure natives, and that nowadays you gotta like it was because of this status I shared where it said dark-skinned natives are looking at us light-skinned natives like we were the ones that signed the treaty. It was kind of funny, but it's like there's an element of truth to it. And he was saying maybe that view that dark-skinned natives have towards mixed bloods like us, because him and I are both mixed, maybe that is karma for how some of the more colonized people back in the day looked at, you know, the pure bloods. And because of the emergence of the 60s, you had activism and people started to feel more pride, and there was rebellion like in the Alcatraz protests and the Wounded Knee 2 standoff. So with some of my South American friends who are very intelligent, very compassionate about our people, it's like they told me the view down there is it's like a lot of them look at North American natives and look at us as majestic and beautiful and noble and brave and all this stuff, and that they look at themselves as more like dark-skinned, ugly peasants, campesinos. And you know, I've had Southern natives, you know, reaffirm, you know, my looks or whatever, and you know, it's about more than looks, but I mean, maybe Southern natives need Northern natives to tell them that they're beautiful in their dark skin, and maybe that's what we need with Southern natives who do appreciate lighter features. And those of us who are mixed, a lot of us look at it as like, if you have mixed features, it's like, if you find that attractive, it's like agreeing with colonization, and maybe that's not necessarily the case. But yeah, kind of like reaffirming each other. So it's like we were colonized in different ways, and there's a lot of negativity, you know, with colorism, and it's bad either way it goes. But maybe we're the pieces of the puzzle that the other needs. That's pretty much
like the, what is it, the condor and the
eagle.
Yep, exactly.
And of course, there's dark-skinned, full-blooded, you know, Northern natives, and there's mestizo, excuse me, not mestizo, but you know what I mean, like mixed.
Right.
But overall, there's more Southern natives that are pure-blooded than there is, you know, Northern. It's just a statistical reality.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I thought was interesting when you brought that up was that there's this YouTube channel called Jelly Bee, where it brings on the perspectives of different, like a lot of different ethnic groups of people, and like arguments that they might have, disagreements. And one was with, you know, Northern Native Americans, and there was like 5, I think, that natives that were pretty dark skinned, and one that was light skinned. And that light skinned one just got he got picked on like several times. I was like, dang, by the other natives. So it's funny that you bring that up.
I wonder if we're thinking of the same thing. It's like they were debating on whether or not, like, the mascot issue and casinos and stuff like that. Was that it?
It was a light skinned guy, right? Native. He looked
right, but like, weren't those the issues that they were talking about? Because if so, that might be the same thing.
Yep, where they went over one line if they agreed, and the other line if they disagreed.
Yeah, I think we're thinking of the same thing. Yeah, the white passing dude that was like supposed to be Chickasaw or something.
Yeah. And I was like, he just disagreed with a few things, and they just went off on it. I was like, gosh, come on now.
It was pretty funny. They were like, "You're acting like the skin you're in," and it was a southwestern native saying that to him. So it's kind of funny. Like, you literally saw that dichotomy there.
Yeah, I saw that. I was like, man, he's gonna get away with saying that. But you know, it is an interesting video, I guess, to learn the perspectives on their points of view. But you know, Crispin, thank you so much for sharing that with us. That being said, we pretty much got over everything that we did on the script. Was there anything you wanted to cover, Wanchalova?
No, I think this is a good podcast. We covered everything pretty well.
Awesome. Crispin, thank you so much for, you know, coming on. We'll have you on again, definitely, very soon, because we do want to have that live as well, if you're interested. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for, you know, tuning in, checking us out. If you like the videos, you know, subscribe if you want. That being said, we're going to tell you guys good night, and we'll see y'all later.